Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No mai, hari mai, and greetings all. My name is Cheryl Adamson, and I'm the General Manager of the Parnell Business Association. If you've tuned in, thanks for watching another episode of Eco Bites, short and sharp topical conversations in the eco space, 8 to 10 questions, one presenter, released monthly. We all know that one of the most important attributes for solving climate change and seeking sustainable solutions is critical and creative thinking. Our speaker today describes herself as a problem solver and creative thinker who uses her innate curiosity and determination to make positive change happen. What an apt description for someone involved in several industries, as I found out, that require complex system planning, one of the main ones being, of course, fashion. So now let me hand over to Josephine Rudkin-Binks, who's a board member of the Parnell Business Association and our sustainability champion, to formally introduce and interview Jacinta FitzGerald, our guest speaker for today. Over to you, Joey.
Kia ora. Gives me great pleasure to introduce Jacinta today. So Jacinta is the Chief Executive of Mindful Fashion, leveraging over 20 years of expertise in the clothing and textile industry. As a seasoned sustainability strategist, she's dedicated to advancing sustainable practices in fashion and passionate about the power of collaboration to create positive impact. In addition to her role at Mindful Fashion, Jacinta leads MakeGood, a consultancy that works with pioneering brands in New Zealand and worldwide, focusing on integrating circular and regenerative practices at the heart of their operations. So kia ora, Jacinta.
Kia ora, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and Mindful Fashion.
So I guess the power of clothing to tell a story has always really captivated me right from when I was a young child. I used to play dress-ups in mum's dress-up closet. I used to make clothes for my Daisy doll. And so I knew sort of really early on that I wanted to work in the fashion industry. And I think when I reflect on that, I think what I found really powerful about that is this ability that our clothing has to tell a story. So, you know, it's armor and protection when you put it on. We can tell the world who we want to be that day. We can use it, you know, as a form of cultural recognition or signaling our belonging to particular groups and organizations. So clothing has really got this incredible power, and I think that's what really drew me to that. So I sort of went to university and studied fashion design and business, and then I started working in the industry, and I worked in the industry for quite a long time. But I had a real, I guess, inflection point. I sort of had a real turning point in my career when I was exposed to the realities of the global fashion industry on a business trip to China. So I'd been traveling to China quite a lot for different companies that I was working with, and I was visiting a new supplier in China. It was a factory that was making like thousands upon thousands of t-shirts. And went into this factory, and sort of next door and next door and next door was another factory, rows upon rows, very, very much the same colors, all brown, sky, sea, the river, the buildings. The air was really thick and gritty, and I just remember it so visceral to me now, like how starkly contrasting that was with the factories that we had back home that I had really grown up working with, which was you go down the road, you visit the supplier, you know them all by name, you can actually touch and feel the products that they're making, you can problem solve on the spot, you know, you really have a lot more direct involvement and control over what's happening. And I sort of came away from that visit, I guess it blew my mind, because I really realized like we'd outsourced the making of our clothing to other countries, but we'd also outsourced all the pollution as well that goes along with that, just in order to get cheaper clothes, you know, cheaper, faster fashion. And I really didn't want to be part of that. And so I, as you said earlier, like I sort of always think about how can we fix this? What's the solutions here? So I wanted to be part of trying to find a better way of doing things. And so I went back to university, I studied sustainability, and then I started, this was really early on in the sustainable fashion movement, I guess you could say. And so there wasn't a lot happening in New Zealand. So I took up a couple of roles overseas, which were, you know, they had a big impact on the future direction of my career, in terms of connecting with what was happening in the global sustainable fashion space. And I got to work with some of the really early adopters, and I came back to New Zealand, and this, I think, was in 2019, and actually that was right at the same time that Kate Sylvester and Emily Miller-Sharma, who were the co-founders of Mindful Fashion, had come up with this idea of how can we sort of collectively tackle sustainability in New Zealand. So I came back to New Zealand. They connected with me because they had seen that I was working in this space, and we sort of got together and talked about what could an organisation do if it was to tackle some of these challenges in a New Zealand-centric way. Yeah. I can tell you a little bit about what we do at Mindful Fashion, if that might be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But also you might not want a monologue from me. So Mindful Fashion is a non-profit organisation. We were founded in 2019, really as a way to help New Zealand's fashion, clothing and textile industry transform and thrive. You know, we're a platform for designers, for brands, for manufacturers, for educators to all come together and to build a collective voice, to collaborate on challenges. And there are a number of challenges that everybody shares, which I'm sure we'll get to. And then really to innovate and find solutions through education, through advocacy, through collective action. Really our North Star as an organisation is helping create an ecosystem for fashion and textiles in Aotearoa where people, nature and business all thrive. And so really recognising how interconnected and interreliant we all are on each other. We have 115 member businesses who share this commitment from across New Zealand, which is really exciting. And we've done quite a lot of work with our members and for the industry and on behalf of the industry in the education space and in the advocacy space. There's a recent report that we actually put out, which I think really speaks to well, it highlights, I guess, the sort of size and scale of the industry that perhaps previously wasn't realised. And that's something that we're immensely proud of because we've been able to go, you know, to New Zealand and to the government and to various industry stakeholders. Like, we are actually more than champagne and catwalks. We're a business. We're an industry of businesses. And we found that the industry contributes 7.8 billion to the New Zealand economy in 2023, which was 1.9% of GDP, so fairly significant, more than supermarkets and specialty foods and more than building construction. And that we employ 76,000 workers, which is 2.4% of the workforce, and 78% of those are female. So we learned, which is incredibly interesting, is that you know, women's economic advancement is intrinsically connected to our industry. It's one of the few professionally led industries dominated by women and full of female entrepreneurs. So, you know, it's really exciting to have that data now to be able to use in conversations as we go forward and, you know, creating this thriving ecosystem.
Wow, I mean, that's a great overview. Thank you. We would definitely like to share the report as well with the EcoBite. That, you know, that sounds great work. And I loved hearing about your aha moment. They're always great insights. And I particularly love the way you call sort of fashion our armour, and that our armour and sustainability don't need to be mutually exclusive either. So that was great. I read that you've got some circular design awards coming up. I'd love to hear a bit more about those.
Sure. So we launched the Mindful Fashion Circular Design Award last year. And I guess if we take a step back, one of the reasons for that is that textile waste is a huge issue. And yet textiles are incredibly valuable. They are made up of natural resources. A huge amount of resource goes into producing textiles. And yet I'll speak to some data on this a little bit later, I think, because it is really important, but so much of them are wasted and so quickly. And so we know that the industry needs to move to a more circular, regenerative economy. We need to value our resources and keep them in use. And we looked as an organisation at how can we really try and start this off in New Zealand, get designers and brands, and consumers really thinking about this circular way of working. And so that was the idea behind the Circular Design Award, is let's challenge designers to design waste out of fashion. You know, start with textile waste as a raw material, and that isn't necessarily old clothing, but it could be you know, textiles that are found in any other industry. Last year we had a really interesting finalist, actually award winner, that used obsolete parachutes to create a new outfit. So we challenged designers to identify a textile waste stream that they could intervene on and redesign, create an outfit, and not only create an outfit, but actually create a circular outfit. So thinking about the full life cycle of the clothing that they make, and really taking a place-based approach based on the principles of Mātauranga Māori. We worked with Johnny Freeland to really help us identify how to weave in these really unique New Zealand Aotearoa cultural aspects to the competition. And so educating, connecting designers with the concepts of the circular economy, providing the education, and then providing the platform for change. That's really the thinking behind the Circular Design Award. And this year's event is coming up at the end of September. We are currently running a range of workshops and masterclasses for the entrants in terms of upskilling in the principles of a circular economy and life cycle design and connection to place. And yeah, we're really excited to see what comes through this year. As I mentioned, the parachute idea, we had a whole range of really innovative reimagining of textile waste come through last year. So very excited about that. And I will just say something that's relevant to businesses. So last year we had one category, which was circular clothing innovation, but this year we've extended that out to circular business innovation, and we've opened the entries up for businesses to enter a circular economy initiative. And we've, I think, had 20 entries on that in that category, which is really exciting to see just how much of this is actually happening on the ground. And we're really looking forward to showcasing some of those at the awards as well.
Oh, sounds great, and awesome to see that uplift in that for that category, 20 entries. Of course, Parnell has a lot of textile and fashion houses and designers as well. So hopefully this is something that would be of interest to them as well. So you touched on earlier a little bit about fast fashion and its impacts, but sort of where have you seen those impacts, kind of either New Zealand and across the world?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because I think that's really the starting point of so much of what we do. The fashion industry globally is a massive contributor to the climate and ecological crisis, to the growing inequality that we're seeing around the world, the impact on workers and communities. And there are some statistics which I think are really worthwhile sharing, because they illustrate the scale of that impact. So we know that our clothing and textile sector generates up to 8% of global carbon emissions. There's a range of different numbers because of the way that emissions are calculated and depending on who's doing it. So the figures are between 4 and 8% of global emissions come from this industry. That's more than aviation and maritime shipping combined. 35% of ocean microplastics come from clothing, which is again enormous. And we know that microplastics are hazardous to not only the health of our oceans and the biodiversity in our oceans, but also to human health. And something that really surprises people is that over 70% of the clothes that we're all wearing began their life as oil. So that is a pretty we need to move away from fossil fuel extraction and consumption of fossil fuels in manufacturing. But 70% of our clothing is actually made from virgin fossil fuel, and so that's a pretty big deal, and has a huge impact. We over the last sort of 20 or 25 years, there's been a dramatic increase in the volume of clothing that's being produced and that's being consumed, and also then that's being wasted. And so we've seen, we know from the data that we're buying 3 times as many clothes as our grandparents did. And so we've sort of seen that increase in the last 25 years, but we're wearing them for half as long. And so the sort of the purchasing has gone dramatically up, and the sort of usability or the length of time that we're wearing them for is really dropping. And we're making about 150 billion garments each year, although I would say that that's probably an underestimation based on the huge rise of brands like Shein and Temu over the last 12 to 18 months. I think that figure, which has been talked about for the last few years, is probably on the low side. So we're making a massive amount of clothing. 85% of it goes to landfill every year. Less than 1% is recycled into new clothing. And we know in New Zealand, just anecdotally, Waste Management have said that Auckland's Redvale landfill alone receives 70 trucks of clothing waste every week to that one landfill. So like, not only is it a massive global problem, but it's actually a really big problem in New Zealand. I think we consume something like 14.5 kilos per person every year, and about 10 kilos go to landfill. So we're sort of churning through clothes at this huge rate. And that's represented, as I said earlier, like not only a massive waste of resources in terms of like we could be using those things, but the planet can't really sustain this volume of extraction of raw materials, consumption of all the resources needed to make those materials. And when I say resources, I mean land use, I mean water that's required to process and dye textiles, to grow and cultivate textiles, or the chemicals, or the sort of fuels to transport things around and to run factories. Like there's just so much that goes into things. For them to be wasted within, 6 to 12 months is absolutely just horrendous. And it, actually the planet can't sustain that. So, things do need to change. So some of those figures really speak to just like how big a problem it is that we are trying to grapple with at the moment.
Yeah, definitely the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, up to 8% global emissions. And then when you think of all that waste, only, up to about 1%'s recycled, the numbers really speak volumes, don't they?
Yeah. So and just on that, like, I think it's interesting to note, there's a real move towards transparency and traceability, which is really important. And I think that as all of us, as wearers of clothes, like this is and should be important to everybody, because we all do wear clothes and we participate in this system, whether we kind of think we do or not, or want to or not. But often, usually, for example, a cotton t-shirt, it can travel to 5 or 6 countries on its way to the end user, sometimes more. It's grown in one country, it gets transported to another country to be sort of spun and processed, another country should be made into a textile, another country should be made into a garment, another country to go to a distribution centre. So the supply chain for a lot of these products is really long, and there's so much, I guess, inefficiency in the system that's causing a lot of these problems as well, and contributing to those huge emissions and waste profiles.
Definitely. And are there any sort of goals, sector goals around some of these stats that the industry has?
That's a really good question. So globally, there's a global organisation that's working on developing sort of industry-wide targets called the Global Fashion Agenda. And so we've fed in, as an organisation, we've fed into their stakeholder engagement. And then there's various global organisations at different parts of the supply chain. So there's a non-profit that works at the textile production stage that's got a target for reducing emissions based on textile production by 45% by 2030. And there's a number of others. And then us at Mindful Fashion, in our recent report that we put out that I spoke about earlier, we have an action plan within there, and one of those recommendations is to actually develop targets for the local industry, and that's something that we're really interested in working with the industry on taking forward, recognising that New Zealand, like the sort of landscape of the New Zealand industry is incredibly different to the global landscape, and so we really need to take a place-based approach again to that, and do something that's kind of fit for the size and scale of our sector. So I guess what I mean by that, an example is that we ran a climate action program a couple of years ago for our members, where we took a cohort through measuring their emissions and developing reduction strategies. And what we learned from that is that for small to medium-sized businesses, and our industry predominantly is, you know, SMEs, they have limited ability to influence and impact their sort of full supply chain outside of the country. And so it's a case of identifying where can we actually set targets that are achievable, and what areas of the life cycle of the garment and of the business and organisation is it manageable in. So there's a bit of a process to go through in that, but that's certainly an area that we are working on.
Well, it's great to hear that there's goals set at a sort of a local level, but also further down the supply chain, which obviously, as you've said, is quite complex. So so that's great to hear. You've mentioned a couple of companies very early on in developing behind mindful fashion, but is there a particular company or product, textile, that you think is really leading in this space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think when I think about that question, I think about what are the impacts of the industry. I've spoken about them: waste, emissions, the massive volume of production, overproduction and consumption. And so I think the answer to that really is the antithesis of those impacts. And so for me, that is products that are designed to last. So when you think about it at a product level, products that are designed to have a long life and that have that sort of circular economy embedded in them. So there's a process for or an ability to repair or send back and have the garment sort of somehow go into a circular system. For anyone that doesn't know what that means, you know, just making sure that those resources are not lost, so that either, you know, captured and go back into some sort of technical cycle of recycling or back into the earth as compost. You know, there's different options for different types of fibres. Natural fibres can go back into the earth. They can also be recycled into new materials, and the same with synthetics. So really products that are designed to last and then to enter a circular economy, I think it's a really important starting point. Products that are made.
I was just going to ask, is there a sort of a directory of what textiles are better than others? I'm thinking Mindful Money has a website you can go to find out which are the better investments. Is there something that if someone's listening to this thinking, yeah, I'd really like to put my fashion money into you know, somewhere where I know it's the design's been thought of circular, is there a good resource to send people to?
I wish there was. That's a really good question. So from a consumer perspective, there is an app in Australia called Good On You, which is a really good place to start in terms of global brands. It doesn't have a lot of New Zealand brands on it, but it will certainly give you the intel on the big retailers that are global that we have here in New Zealand. Certainly look at Mindful Fashion members, because, you know, our members are all working on our programs and have really committed to the work that we're doing. But I would also say, and this is something that we are also educating our members on, is around that materials. So we know that the material that a garment is made from is responsible for, you know, 40 to 60% of the environmental impact of that product comes from the material choice. And so that's a really critical area for us in terms of education on how to help businesses improve. But it's also a really good place for consumers to start thinking about in terms of reducing their impact. And so look for certified materials, organic certification, recycled certification. We know that natural fibres that are grown in an organic or regenerative way, you know, they really can be creating positive environmental and social impacts. And so I'd be looking for things like that. Definitely looking at those certifications and certified materials. FSC certification, both for packaging, but also for materials is another one. And then I guess in terms of brands, like there are a few that really stand out to me that are leading in this space. I mean, it's always really hard to answer this because you don't want to select some and leave others out. There are so many that are doing incredible work, but I do want to highlight brands like Koto, which is a New Zealand brand who announced that they went plastic free at the start of this year. Like that is a leading, like they're leading the way globally in that. I don't know of another brand in the world that has gone plastic free right down to the thread and the way that that thread goes through a sewing machine. So that's a really exciting development, and you know, hopefully a lot will come from that. We've got a great session on our website actually about how they did that for anybody that's interested in looking into that more. And then we have some other brands in New Zealand, Untouched World, Standard Issue, Northwear, Cactus Outdoor. There's quite a range of them who are using New Zealand wool and lots of New Zealand fibres. They have stewardship programs in place, so things like Care for Life. They offer free repairs. They take garments back at the end of their life and they will circulate them for you. They'll, you know, I know with Standard Issue, garments that are no longer wearable, they'll recycle those garments back into new fibre to make new products. So there's a lot of really good sort of services that are being offered around clothing by New Zealand brands. And so I think when you're looking for who to support, look at who is investing in taking that responsibility for the product through its life cycle. I think that's a really good starting point. And then we have other brands like Juliet Hogan, you know, that are making really classic styles with longevity in mind. And so there's I guess this illustrates the complexity of sustainability because there's a lot of ways to tackle it. But we need to slow down the volume of, you know, consumption and production and keep what we have in use for longer and love it and cherish it because, you know, clothes can be amazing and, you know, they can bring joy to your life and they have so many benefits. So I think we don't want to lose that. And I think we're really at risk of losing that with this kind of dirge of cheap fast fashion that is, you know, entering New Zealand. There's no floodgates at the border. You know, floodgates are wide open. There's stuff flooding into our market and, you know, that's really causing a lot of problems. So, yeah, support New Zealand businesses that are doing the good work on the ground. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Oh, that's awesome. And some great tips and advice there, and definitely look and shop from the Mindful Fashion members as well. So yeah, great piece of advice. So thank you so much. It's been so insightful, and you know, the numbers, as I say, just speak volumes, and so really appreciate your time today, and thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you. It's been really wonderful to have a conversation with you about this. So thanks very much.
Kia ora.